What is going on, everybody? This is Yes, I Read That, and today I am reviewing Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. Warbreaker is actually available completely free of charge. Brandon Sanderson provides it on his website completely free. The link is down in the description. It's actually amazing. He wanted to release a free ebook and he did. And you can also buy the paperback book, obviously, and that costs, but if you have an ebook reader, you can read this completely free of charge, or you could always read it on your phone. Warbreaker is a fantasy book, and it actually ties in with Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere universe, which means it ties in with Mistborn and with the Stormlight Archive, both of which I already reviewed on this channel. I would say you can also read this as a standalone, but if you read the Stormlight Archives, then I would actually highly recommend you to read this book because it ties in very well, and I don't want to spoil anything, but yeah, you'll get to know some interesting stuff here. Now, before I give my review score, I'm going to tell you a bit about the world and the story and what I liked and disliked about the book, and there's actually a ton of stuff here, so let's talk about the world first. As I said, this is a fantasy book, and what good is fantasy without magic? So Sanderson built a really creative book and a really creative magic system again. The world is pretty rich with history and traditions. The basic premise in the world is that there is a nation called Halandren and a nation called Idris, and in Halandren there is a god king who rules in the court of gods, and in Idris there is the older royal family who used to rule before them. Well, and Halandren obviously says that they are rebels, whereas Idris thinks that they are the official royal family. So there's a conflict between the court of gods and the royal family. And the way that the magic in Warbreaker works is, like usual in Brandon Sanderson's books, it is very scientific and very well explained. It is based on biochromatic breath, and every person has a breath. However, you can give your breath to other people, and some people have a lot of breath and become very powerful. And if you consume breath of other people, you will reach some heightenings. These heightenings allow you to gain some abilities, like identify exactly what color something is, or to get more sensitive to the world around you, to feel life around you, and basically you can reach different heightenings and get some abilities. And the God King and the gods in the court of gods have an immense amount of breath, so they have reached very high heightenings and they are very powerful because of that. That is because the gods are actually returned, which means they died at some point, but for some reason they came back from the afterlife or whatever there is in this world, and they were resurrected with a humongous amount of breath. So they're called returned, and they are the gods living in the court of gods. Now, the true royal family are just normal people. However, they have some specific properties as well. For example, they can change their hair color at will, or when under emotional stress or when happy, the hair changes color. So the basic premise is that the princess of the royal family in Idris has to travel to Halandren to marry the god king, because the court of gods in Halandren obviously wants some royal blood in their god king to have an official claim on the throne and to have an official claim on ruling the country. So let's talk about the story. As I said, the princess of Idris has to travel to Halandren, to the city of Titalir, to actually marry the god king. Initially, Vivenna should go there and marry him. However, in the last minute, the king decides that his other daughter, Ciri, should actually travel there. So Ciri has to travel to Titalir, and she arrives at the court of gods and is immediately told that she needs to produce an heir for the god king. However, she also realizes that there's something else going on, and she's being told that the court of gods is a dangerous place with many different political forces playing here, and that not everything is how it seems, basically. And when Ciri arrives at the court of gods, she quickly notices that there is a war being planned between Halandren and Idris. So she and Vivenna are doing their best to prevent that war because Idris would be hopelessly outmatched. So we have a little bit of court intrigue, and in the meantime we have Vivenna, who suddenly her whole life became meaningless because all she did was prepare to marry the God King, and who decides to travel to Talir as well to free her sister from the terrible God King. So let's talk about the characters in this book at first. There's 4 main characters. The first one is Ciri, obviously, who is a young adult. She is wild and free, and she's never had a very strict parenting, I guess. She is a princess, obviously, and she just wants to be free. Now she's forced to marry the God King, and obviously at first it is very humiliating for her, and well, she has to arrange with her new situation in the court, and she has to start, getting into the politics there, which she never did back in her home country. On the other hand, there is Vivenna, who is Ciri's sister, and she should have married the God King instead, but the king decided not to marry her. And she is beautiful, she is composed, she's tall, she's basically the perfect royal family member. Now, when she travels to Talir, her worldview and her Idrian values are kind of shattered. She is forced to work with some mercenaries to rescue her sister, and she has to go through a lot to actually do that. The next character in this book is called Vasher, and he is very interesting. We don't know a lot about him in the beginning. All we know is that he is an awakener, which means he carries a lot of breath and he has reached some hastenings. So he can actually use the breath to manipulate things like clothes or, fabrics to follow his will. And he carries a sword called Nightblood that is actually a sentient sword. And the sword is basically trying to destroy evil, so it's always like, do you want to destroy some evil? It loves killing. It's a very interesting sword, and it's also present in the Stormlight Archives. You might know it if you read those books. And the last character is Lightsong. Lightsong is the god of bravery in the court of gods, so he's actually a god. However, we soon realize that the gods are not even allowed to leave the court of gods, and he has few duties, so he kind of slacks about, and he builds this image around him that he's very useless and very lazy, and he doubts his own divinity. So he deliberately undermines his image and always pretends to be lazy and useless. However, he's one of the few gods who always attend all their petitions and who always look at all their art and all the offerings that people make for him. So he's also a kind-hearted guy. He's a very kind guy, he's a very good-hearted god, but he can't really do much. The god's very restricted. So he's in a very interesting position. He doubts his own divinity. He is pretending to be very lazy, but at the same time has a lot of followers. The other gods also have a high opinion of him, so he's in a very interesting position, and I think Lightsong was actually my favorite character in this book. So now that we've kind of got a glimpse of the story, I'm gonna get to my likes and dislikes. Overall, I think the 4 characters fit this book really well. We have 4 different points of views, so I think that fit really well. It's an awesome setting. The city Talir itself is kind of an oriental setting. We have spicy dishes and fruits and a jungle, but also sand and deserts and the sea. So it's really cool. It's a really cool setting. I really enjoyed that. The main story itself is very interesting as well. So we have a lot of questions that we don't really know the answer to. What is actually going on in the Court of Gods? What is Vasher's goal? What is he trying to do? What will Lightsong, the god of bravery, do? What is Vivenna going to do? Is she going to be able to rescue her sister? Most of all, can the war that is almost going on between Idris and between Halandren be prevented? The next thing I like is the magic system. As usual with Brandon Sanderson, it's very creative, it's very cool with the biochromatic breath and the abilities you gain through hastenings. It's really cool. I was very pleasantly surprised how well this whole book ties into the Stormlight Archives. I didn't really expect that. I knew that it kind of ties into it, but I didn't know just how much, and it's much more than you initially think. Yeah, I can say that. I'm going to have to tell you more in the spoiler section after the score, because I just don't want to spoil anything for you if you want to read the book. But what I can say is that characters from Warbreaker do actually appear in the Stormlight archives. So that's all I'm gonna say for now, and you can figure out the rest if you decide to read this book. This also makes me really contemplate if I should read the Mistborn trilogy too, because I read the first 3 books of Mistborn and I really liked the end, so I was like, I don't want to read the next ones in case they're just not as good, if that makes sense. And I decided not to continue with that, but maybe I'll read them. But I have so many books on my to-be-read pile, so... My dislikes for this book are mainly 2 things. The main thing is basically I expected more of the end. The end of the book was what was driving the whole book, you know. You were always interested and the whole tension was coming from how the whole situation will be resolved. And in the end I felt very disappointed with the way this was resolved. I felt it was way too easy and way too cheap. And I don't want to spoil it here, but that's just how I thought. After giving my score, I will tell you a bit more in depth about my thoughts, and I think it will make sense then. And the next thing is that the whole conspiracy in the Court of Gods was a bit lackluster in the end as well. Like, I expected a lot more. So my score for this book is a 7 out of 10. As I said, it's a great book. I feel like the score is even a bit generous because I was just a bit disappointed in the end, but it has great tension, it has great characters, the story is interesting in itself. I just felt that the end was a bit lackluster. I think this is not Brandon Sanderson's best book, but I would still recommend it to you if you read the Stormlight Archives, just because it ties in very well with that. Overall, I still think it's a good book. If you want to check out if the Stormlight Archives could be for you, you can read this book. However, I think the Stormlight Archives is better. It's just better. But the book is free after all, so if you want to check out a free fantasy book, then I think this book is a really good value for a free book. So now I'm gonna get into the spoiler section. If you didn't read the book, then turn off the video, you know, maybe download the book, link is in the description below, and you can read it on your phone, you can read it on an ebook reader, or you can get the physical book and actually read the real book. Alright, so spoilers. Turn off the video now if you did not read the book. First things first, I think Shashara is a really cool name. Nah, I'm just kidding. I think it's a cool name, but let's get to the real stuff. I think Nightblood, the sentient sword, is really cool, and I love how it ties into the Stormlight archives, and I just think the idea of a sword that is commanded to destroy evil is really good, and the idea that it doesn't know what evil is makes a lot of sense. So when I'm thinking about the book, the first thing that comes to mind is Ciri's story, her marrying the God King, and for me it was kind of obvious that she would in a way rebel again, like she always did at home, and obviously she can die, so she will befriend the God King. So that was expected for me. What I didn't expect was that the God King has no tongue and is essentially just a placeholder, and the real power in the Court of Gods is someone else. So at that point it starts becoming obvious that there's some kind of conspiracy group who is trying to manipulate the Court of Gods from the inside. I also really enjoyed Ciri's interactions with Lightsong, the god of bravery. Lightsong was also very interesting, him being a kind of useless god and always manipulating his image in that way. I really liked when he started investigating, and I really liked the ending when Blushbeaver died and he was terrified for a second, you know, and him always denying that divinity, and it was kind of true. I mean, he was just a return, he wasn't a god. And the last thing, Vasher and Vivenna, you know, their stories were kind of okay, but not really good for me. Because Vivenna was kind of interesting at first. You know, she met the mercenaries, she started to manipulate the population into Talir, and then she realizes that the mercenaries are actually using her and using her for their profit. I think that was interesting, and I liked the way that her character changed, but the story overall was just made no sense. First she manipulated the population to create a war, and then with Vasher, she actually started to try and prevent the war. But in the end, all of this doesn't matter. It's like Brandon Sanderson completely forgot that he actually had a huge story with Vivenna trying to manipulate the population. And in the end, it's just completely useless. It doesn't matter anymore in the end. So why do I even read that? Like, I don't understand. Am I the only one who feels that way? I also have to say that in the end, the twist that Susebron, the God King, got his tongue restored was very obvious. I mean, you have a God King who needs a tongue to use his immense breath. And then you have these gods who have one purpose in life, and that is to heal or help another person. What's going to happen? Can you guess it? I mean, it's super obvious, super obvious. So I think the ending was just really lackluster. There was almost no fighting. I mean, there was fighting, but Vivenna, Vasher and Ciri only met after everything was over. So I was like, maybe there's gonna be this epic end where Vasher rushes in with Nightblood, or maybe even Vivenna uses Nightblood and it's going to be epic, but no, it's just Susebron instantly saves Ciri and there's a bit of a battle between Vasher and Denth. That's kind of cool, but that's it. And the last thing is how the war was prevented. 40,000 lifeless marching on Idris. And then there's Vasher is just like, oh, by the way, there's 10,000 pretty much unbeatable soldiers that you can just use. Here, problem solved. That's incredibly cheap, in my opinion. I'm not sure if I'm the only one who feels that way. It's always hard to say if something is epic and a cool twist, or if it's cheap. In this case, I just feel like it's cheap. I don't know. So the twist with Vasher actually being one of the 5 scholars and being this very important person back in the many wars, it was cool, it was interesting, and there was a lot of world building, and I really enjoyed all of that. And I think that the second book, if there ever is one in this Warbreaker series, will be really cool. But I just felt that the ending was really lacking. It could have been so much better. The whole conspiracy was basically just that there is going to be a war between Halandren and Idris. But that's something we knew in the entire book. The only new thing in the conspiracy was that not Halandren was trying to do this, but that another nation was trying to cause this war. So the only really cool thing in this book is actually the magic system, the setting, and the initial story, for me, and how it ties into the Stormlight Archives, because that is actually crazy. I didn't realize that Vasher is actually Zahel in the Stormlight Archives, the warrior Ardent, who is a sword teacher. I did kind of realize that Vivenna is going to be the woman that I think she's called Azur, because her hair changed once, I think. But it's really cool. It is really cool. But it's kind of sad that the end was a bit lackluster for me. It was still a good book. It's hard to call the ending bad, but I would have expected a lot more. So yeah, if you read the book, tell me if you agree, if you disagree. Did you feel the same way about the end? Because I just thought it was a bit lackluster. But if you like this review, then please leave a like, maybe sub to this channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Till then, bye!